in conversation with Doug Wheeler. Doug Wheeler, Doctor of Philosophy, is an acclaimed psychotherapist of 35 years. Is also, most recently, an author. His debut book, Reimagining Jonah, A Flight to Freedom, is now available to order. After enduring several personal losses and quietly turning from organized religion in 2016, Doug now walks at the intersection of psychology and spiritual formation, integrating head and heart for the actualization of the truest self. In the second half of life, he continues to pursue newness and enlightenment, along with better ways of helping others through his practice, his art, and the ways he engages the world. He runs his private practice on the east side of Seattle, where he lives with his wife, Laurie, and dog, Shakespeare. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure and joy to have on the show today, Doug Wheeler. How are you doing, Doug?
Uh, Oh, Peter, I was doing well before I saw you, and now I'm doing so much better. You have such a bright countenance. It makes me smile.
Thank you. Thank you. That's such an amazing compliment. I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, yes, yes.
Yeah. Doug, I want to first say that I really enjoy reading your book that I found to be quite captivating and wholesome. And, I'd love to ask you, of all the characters in the Bible, and I mean the entire characters of the Bible, why did you choose to particularly retell the story of
Hmm.
Jonah? What is it particularly that piqued your interest in Jonah himself, that made you retell
Hmm.
his story in this, overly detailed, descriptive, and literary manner? Would you love to talk about that?
I would love to talk about that, Peter. Thank you for starting with that.
Yeah.
So, as I say in the introduction of the book, I had been asked to speak at a local church in the Seattle area by a dear friend of mine who
Mm.
pastors at the church, and I've enjoyed over the years those kind of speaking engagements. So it was a Sunday morning. It was time for a sermon. I had not been reading the Bible for a while. I was at
Wow.
odds with a faith that I had been involved in for 40 some odd years. This was in 2016. And
Oh.
so I thought if I'm going to speak at a local church, I know that I must have a text. And if I'm going to have a text, I need to have the Bible as the fundamental text. So I grabbed my Bible and I anxiously, and I emphasize anxiously, looked for something to talk about. And
Mm.
I thought, this feels a bit hypocritical. It feels like an imposter syndrome because I've not been reading the Bible. So how can I show any interest?
Wow.
I would have talked about something else in a different venue, but when you're in a church, um, it's time to use the text. So I
Yeah.
thought to myself, the shortest book that I know in the Bible is Jonah. So I
Mm.
think I can get through that really quickly and I might be able to piece something together. And so I read the story once and I say it in the introduction of the book. Nothing, it was rather lackluster to me,
Mm.
but I had to stay with it because I had to get something out of this story. So
Absolutely.
I did get something out of the story. And I tell you, that morning I had an extra amount of energy and passion about this character of Jonah.
Wow.
I sure didn't give an exhaustive sermon on the life of Jonah because I didn't know really anything about it. It's a very short book. It's four
Mm.
little chapters. And most people that are acquainted with the Bible and the story of Jonah would say it's an odd little story.
Mm.
And many people would say it like this, Peter. It's an odd story about an odd little man. Most people would think of him, little meaning literally like he's not a significant prophet.
Mm.
He and he would be in many sermons have been about, hey, if you want an example of a person of no faith or a person who's rebellious or
Yeah.
a person who didn't obey, let's talk about Jonah. So I started
Mm.
to make it really simple. I started feeling empathy for Jonah, and that's what after the sermon, which went well,
Yeah.
I couldn't put the story down.
Wow.
And so That's a long way to answer your question. I feel like Jonah chose me. That's what it felt like.
Wow.
Jonah chose me, and there was something that I was to get for as much as something that me. So it began this relationship with this fictitious person named Jonah.
Wow. Wow, that's quite lovely, really. I love your take on that. While I started reading the book, it was quite pulling. And I was like, this would be the first question that I would love to ask you. You know,
Mm.
yeah, so thank you. Thank you for
No,
sharing.
sure.
Also a section in your book where you wrote that, you found the literality of the part Jonah was swallowed by the fish unimportant, whether by historical account or profound metaphor. And I would
Yes.
like to ask you, why do you find it unimportant? What are you trying to propose here? What are you
Mm.
proposing? And would you like to expatiate more on this?
Have you heard the expression, Peter, the devil's in the details? That's an
Wow.
expression it's kind of an older expression, but that's what comes to mind. What I really wanted to do is I wanted to upend the controversy around, okay, did he get swallowed by a whale or not? So that's what I speak of. And I've read that sentence. I appreciated you honing in on that. I've gone back to that sentence.
Mm,
I recently did the audio book. 2 weeks ago, I went into the studio and the audio book will be coming out. And I read my story again, and I've read it so many times, of course. And that's a sentence that I might write a little differently to be clear about what was saying. I think this is true for any author. You read your work and you go, I could have said that better. But really what I
mm,
was getting at, I was trying to upend the controversy of, does it really matter if this individual was swallowed by a whale or not? And then we get sidetracked with that. I don't
mm,
care because the message is in, be it metaphor or be it literal. It doesn't matter because if it's metaphor, it's in my imagination that he swallowed. In this whole
mm,
book, I was thinking about getting ready for our interview, and I thought one of the reasons I wrote the book, and it might be kind of uh, uh, it might be a way to stay out of harm's way. Nobody
wow.
can nobody can really argue with my take on the story because I just imagined it. So I don't have to prove a point. I
Mm,
don't have to say this is based on facts. It's just based on the book, but it really is in my imagination. I
yeah.
wanted to tell the backstory of Jonah. Like
Mm,
everybody focuses on what he did and didn't do. But as a therapist, I'm always focused on, but why did that happen?
why did it happen?
why
Wow.
why is this happening? So that was what drove me. But anyways, I've heard so many sermons where half the sermon will be, folks, you in the audience, some of you believe that he actually got swallowed, and how in the world could a little man live in the side of a fish? Others of you don't believe it. I just wanted to say
Mm,
it essentially doesn't matter.
wow. Wow. That's quite deep, really. That's quite lovely. Thank you for expounding on that. At least I can get my clarification in a much better way.
Oh, good,
You know?
good, good.
Yeah, thank you. Because I really had to spot that out while reading the book,
Mm,
and I think it would be nice to have a conversation around this particular, point, really. So thank you
it's
for
interesting.
sharing. I love the sound of it.
My pleasure, Peter. Thank you for the
Yeah.
specific question. I love those specific questions.
You're welcome. Now, I'd also like to ask you, what compelled you to write Reimagining Jonah? Also, what are the
Hmm.
crises that young males are facing in our modern world?
Well, I have a two-part answer to your first question is what compelled me. What compelled me at that time, I didn't fully understand it until I finished the book of really what I think is happening with males today. Um, I'll speak to that in a moment. But what compelled me was I felt like I needed to help Jonah get free from a story that's been told of him that I
Mm,
don't think is the complete story. So I felt defensive, as if I was defending, if I were an attorney. And I've often thought if I didn't go into being a therapist, I often thought about, I think I would enjoy being an attorney, fighting
mm,
for somebody's rights to be heard. So I felt like I was defending my client, Jonah, to say, wait a second, wait a second. why does Jonah always come on the short end? The sermon tends to end with, he's a disobedient, bad fellow who learned a lesson because he got chastised. And I
Wow.
said to myself, well, why don't we talk about the God who chastises him?
Mm.
And I've had people ask me, Peter, so Doug, do you still believe in God? Doug, do you believe that you have, in one sense, the right and authority to challenge who God is and then to tell people who God is or isn't? And my thought is, no. I just took the story as literally a literary, like it's a little novella, it's a little
Yeah.
novel.
Yeah.
And so I felt the freedom to say, I don't know who God is in the
Wow.
universe, but the God in this story needs somebody to challenge the way he treats his prophet because he chastises him and is very hard on him. And then I get into, as a therapist, I get into, wait a second, I think this is more of his father's God than
Mm.
Jonah's God. Jonah's longing for a different God. So he's on the run, not even knowing. He's looking for a God he's never found. And so that brings me to, what do I think is the crisis these days? Because you asked me,
Yeah.
what is one of the takeaways from the book? I think young males, and I just turned 65 on the 11th of March, and I'm still
Wow.
figuring this out. How does a male legitimately use his power?
Mm.
How is power to be used? And that sure doesn't mean um, that women don't have power as well. But I know in our system, and this story reeks of, there's not a female in the story.
Mm.
That little story, there's not a female in the story. It's like a male wrote it, it's male dominated.
Mm.
But I did find in my research, Peter, that when you look at the Hebrew word for fish, it's
Yeah.
of a female persuasion. And I speak about that in the book. And that's why I named the fish she fish,
Wow.
is that I wanted this to be a depiction of, you got this cantankerous, upset, uh, easily offended God.
Mm.
Um, and then you have this female fish who's the most loving presence in the book. And so that's where I said, my friend, my Islamic friend said, oh, in the Quran, we read this as Jonah had to be swallowed, taken back into the womb so he could be reborn.
Mm.
And I loved that. So you found that in chapter 4 of my book in the settling
Yeah.
chapter.
Yeah.
He's in the gestation, he's in the womb of the she-fish, and something is transformative happening to him. I think males are very confused about how to use their power because male power has been so misused.
Mm.
And so there's confusion, and I think there's grief as well, because a lot of men's anger is a display of the wrong distribution of power. There's
Wow.
something gone right. So it needs to get clarified. How do you use your power? Any human
Yeah.
being has been entitled with power. Um,
Wow.
my dog Chester has his own power,
Yeah.
right? So we all have power. How do we use it for good?
Absolutely. Wow. This is quite deep, thought provoking, really. And I love your take on it. Thank you so much for sharing. I love the sound of it. And I'd also like
Thank
to
you, Peter.
ask you, with the publication of Retelling Jonah, I would like to ask you, how has the book been received thus far? Also, do you have plans retelling the story of another biblical character in the future?
I'm going to answer your second question first.
Yeah.
I actually don't.
Well,
I think I want to. People have asked me, so you're working on your second book, and I thought I'm not done with Jonah. But I think what I'm not done with is I'm not done with some of the themes in Jonah. So I think that I would
wow.
write probably that the next book would be a truly nonfiction book, maybe
Oh,
something about power. Um, so I don't think that I'm on to something like now I'm going to tell the story of Jeremiah or I'm going to tell the story. That feels kind of tropish to me. It's like I
Mm,
I'm not really interested in any other characters at this time.
mm,
Um, this Jonah character just really caught me off guard. Um, the first question, I think most authors are disappointed when they look at the sales. I didn't write the book uh, for a stream of income.
mm.
I wrote the book to help people in their lives.
Wow.
Sure, money is fine. I would like it to grant my voice more exposure. And this is one of the things that felt so good when you reached out to me. I thought, oh, this is one of the reasons, or not one of the reasons I wrote the book, but I'm sure glad that I finished it, because you
Mm.
would have never asked me to come on your show
If
if I
you
had a
weren't an
book,
author, yeah.
if I only wrote 50% of it. So I'm really glad that I finished it.
Yeah.
Um, I think, I will say, the 22 some odd 5-star reviews that we have on Amazon, those mean a lot to me. Um,
Mm.
and you can read all those and you see a theme that begins to emerge about
Wow.
what people are taking from the book. But I'll tell you, early on, I had a dear friend of mine in the state that I grew up in Kentucky. He wrote to me and
Wow.
said, this book has been very important for me. And he didn't really say too much about what it was, but he said, I passed it on to a friend who's in crisis. And about
Oh.
a week later, Peter, he literally sent me the text that his friend that was in crisis said about reading my book.
Wow.
And he just said, without details, he just said, this book was so timely for me to
Wow.
help address the crisis that I'm in. And his words were, everybody needs to read this book. And I
Wow.
just felt like, that meant so much to me, that one person's life,
Absolutely.
I think, was changed.
Yeah. Wow. That was amazing, really. That's so amazing. And I love the reception, really. Sounds great. Sounds
Yeah,
great. That's a great job you've done.
good. And,
Yeah.
and Peter, you're a writer yourself. I looked at your bio, and my goodness, I thought we need to give an opportunity for Peter to be able to say not only has he written 5 or 6 books, but he's currently finishing a novel.
Thank
So
you.
I'm looking at the books behind you, and I'm
Yeah.
saying every true writer is surrounded by books.
Yeah, absolutely.
You must be an avid reader.
Yeah.
Congratulations. I will start with that first one you showed.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'll send you a
And
link to
maybe
that afterward.
that'd be great. I did a podcast for about a year and a half to almost 2 years. We did about 55 episodes. Maybe I'll
Wow.
restart that, and we'll flip the mics where I'll have you as my guest, and I'll say, Peter,
That'll
tell me
be
about that
great.
novel you just finished.
I would love to.
Good.
Thank you. That's
Sure.
great. And now, Doc, judging from the conclusion part of your book, you seem to have a reason, or I'd say a mission, for retelling the story of Jonah.
Mm,
Now, I would like to ask you, what moral takeaways or ethics
mm,
were you trying to preach with this book? Because to me, I feel like each chapter has a message on itself to convey, judging from the pages that we have in ruminating to the chapter in running, the chapter in
mm,
sinking, settling, rising,
mm.
differentiating, disrupting, disintegrating, and others. And I'd love to ask you, do you have a particular lesson that you particularly intend to pass on to humans from your, deep description of Jonah's story?
Oh, I love this question, Peter. Thank you. Thank you. Two things are coming to my mind. Number one is those 9 chapters.
Yeah,
I think I can argue that those 9 chapters are in the story itself. I extracted those from,
yeah,
but I also imposed those onto the story. So it really is like good psychotherapy. And that is, if I'm working with a client or a group of folks or a family and we're doing family systems work,
mm,
they are impacting me with their story and their truth. And simultaneously, I'm impacting them. And so we're creating something
mm,
where they are their own unit. I'm my own unit, and then we do a collective we. And I
Mm.
think that what I got from Jonah is those 9 chapters represent, I believe, a consecutive shift in growth. I think
Wow.
that many times, even if we're not in crisis, but let's take crisis, for example.
Yeah.
Let's say a person's in crisis and they must make a decision. I think
Mm.
there's a period of ruminating.
Yeah.
I think there's a period of some form of running or an invitation to leave something.
Yeah.
Then sinking is a time of going deeper into what's happening to me. And of
Mm.
course, I use Jonah as an example of that. Chapter 4 is a time of settling. It's like the sinking, you reach to the bottom, if you will.
Mm.
And then how long do you, in the story it says 3 days and 3 nights. Well, 3 days and
Mm.
3 nights in the Old Testament is symbolic of a period of time.
Yeah.
So we don't know if he was in there for a literal 3 days or 3 nights, but the message is, metaphorically, if you will, figuratively, is he could have been in there for a long, long time.
Wow.
And then he rises. And then he rises. He comes
Wow.
out of that space. And then we hope at that point that the story ends in a very positive way. He rises, he's been spit out of the fish's mouth, he lands
Yeah.
on dry ground,
Yeah.
and that's when the real hardship begins.
Wow.
And that's where the story takes a turn. And I think you can, again, I can justify this, or I at least can argue. That's a better way, not justify, but I can argue that right when we see him rise and he gets the recall from God, go to Nineveh, and it says for the second time, go do this dastardly deed, that if they don't repent, I'm going to burn this city to the ground. Essentially, that's
Mm.
what's being conveyed. Is that Jonah obeys this time. And this is when traditionally in religious circles, especially in the Christian tradition, this is where it's celebrated. Like Jonah finally obeys.
Obeys.
And you know what? When I read that time after time, what I said to myself is, he didn't progress. He just experienced a regression. He went
Mm.
back into an old message. He went back into a place that's not his true self.
Mm.
I wanted him to run again. I wanted him to run again, but I knew that if I did that, I would not be true to the story. He doesn't run. He burrows in and heeds the call. And that's when it gets really problematic. So I think it
Wow.
represents he gets thrown overboard and he gets swallowed by this fish, and that all kind of represents circumstances of challenge. I think from chapter in the Bible story in chapter 3, verse 1, all the way to the end of chapter 4, it's like midway. I think what happens then is it's all what's going on inside of Jonah. It's the internal struggle. No
Mm.
longer is it being thrown overboard. No longer is it getting swallowed by a fish. Now it's Jonah inside of himself, really having to deal with what's been going on. And I then want to think about his trauma really comes and starts to really emerge.
Wow.
He can't run any longer.
Yeah.
And and I think the God in the story has him cornered. And I took issue with that. Now I will
Wow.
tell you, Peter. I'll tell you, Peter. I speak of this, and I'll be brief about this because I know we're also kind of constrained by time. But I'll be brief with. I started writing the story in, let's say, August of 2016, and Peter, on the
Mm.
day after Christmas, my
Yeah.
only sibling, my older brother, took his own life.
Wow.
And Peter,
That's so sad.
I will tell you, Peter, it was at that point that this story of Jonah became, well, um, I read Jonah's words to God many times in the story. He begs God to take his life. And I saw a
Mm.
suicidality in Jonah. And I
Mm.
began to even look at my brother's taking his own life. And I did some really, I went back into therapy to really process as much as I knew about my brother's trauma and the depression he had found himself in at age 60, that I think was part
Wow.
and parcel of him taking his own life, because anybody who knew my brother would have said he would be the last person that
Do
anybody would
that.
ever think would
Mm,
be in this crisis.
mm.
So after this
Wow.
took place, my spiritual life shifted, and I got really upset with the God in the story, and I got upset with the God in my own life. And that's why when you read my bio and I said that I deconstructed my faith to the point where I left organized religion. Now, I've not been back to church since I left, and I've been a spiritual wanderer ever since. And I went
Wow.
through a season. I went through a season of of being not agnostic, if that kind of says, well, there's kind of a God, but it's not he or she or whatever's not to be identified. I decided I'm going to be an atheist. I have no
Wow.
interest in believing there's any God who governs anything. And I tried to be honest about that. I didn't want to just kind of find a kind of a place to rant from. I was like, this has got to be real. Am I really believing that the God that I have known for many years of my life, the majority of my life, no longer exists to me? And
Wow.
I decided, if you do exist, I have no interest in you because what you put my brother through. So it all has been quite a personal journey, and Jonah carried me through. I would say this to people in grief: if you can
Wow.
find something to work on, if you can find something, build something in your garage, if it's writing a book, if it's taking up a hobby, it sounds trivial when you're up against significant grief. I needed something to distract me from the pain.
Mm,
And just writing a book, I can't believe I wrote a book. I was never setting out to write. My bet is you've been an author for a while, and you maybe had an appetite early on as a young boy. I sure
mm.
didn't. I took it on as a project. Like, I got to have something to do, or I'm just going to sit here and stew in my loss. So I thank Jonah for a lot of reasons. Jonah's become a dear friend of mine, that I've internalized Jonah. And I also realized I had a Jonah inside of me. And I think we all have a Jonah inside of us. That's the message I want to say, that there's a Jonah inside of us that needs attention.
Wow. Well, your answers are quite deep. They're quite debateful. They're quite argumentative. Yeah,
Yes,
and yeah, it's really long roller coaster. Even the fact that you mentioned the death of your brother in there, it's quite sad, really, and how it
yes,
led you to a spiritual shift and change of perception. Yeah, that's quite a lot to take in, really. That's
it's
really
a
quite a
lot.
lot to take in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry to hear about that too.
Peter, I appreciate that. Whenever anybody really genuinely says it as you, it lands inside of me as very meaningful, because um, death is tough, but suicide is one that uh, my dear cousin, whose husband took his life after the Vietnam War, I spoke with her days after my brother's death, and she said, Doug, you just joined a club that you have no intention of ever joining, and it's one of the
Mm,
worst clubs to be a member of. But at least we can support each other when you've
mm,
had a loved one take their own life. It's a it's a very odd ending. It's a very odd ending.
it is.
Um, yeah, it is. So
Yeah.
I thank my brother every day for his closeness. I feel my brother at times. That could just be in my mind, but it's in my mind, and I feel his closeness, and I remain proud of him. Um, and I understand suicide. I
Mm.
understand it. And I was a therapist, I'm a therapist, and I thought I understood it clinically, but I'd never experienced it personally.
Wow. Wow. Wow, that's a lot, dog. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. And
My
now,
pleasure,
could you
Peter.
tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? Are there any challenges you've encountered in the process of writing this book and
Mm,
also ever since it got published?
mm. Gosh, Peter, I want to ask you, because you published all that stack of books you showed me. I think first thought is, does Peter sleep? how does Peter do this? I could barely get one book out of him. How did Peter, he's young. I've not asked you your age, but you're definitely younger than I am. How did Peter do this? I would say for me, Peter, um, I just was determined to not stop, and I got help along the way. My younger son is uh, he's a gifted writer himself. He's currently in a
Wow.
job that pays the bills.
Wow.
Um, he helped me. I had kind of fallen flat on my face and hit writer's block. Uh, and it was a significant wall of block. And he helped, he joined me and introduced some new characters into the story, and it kind of brought me back to life. My
Mm.
wife is a true author. I think you
Wow.
can, I think one of the litmus tests for a true author is to ask them, how many books do you read in a day, week, month, or year? And my wife is surrounded by books.
Wow.
And she's working on a children's book. She's
Wow.
working on a novel that she's been working on for a long time. I think the children's book will come out much sooner than the novel. Um, my older son is a filmmaker living in LA.
Wow.
He helped me, and I give credit to all these good people, and then other friends of mine that just kept cheering me on. I had people that would ask me, "Where are you, man?" in the writing process, and I'd be like, "Oh
Mm.
man, I got stacks of stuff, and I don't know how to finish it." So my older son really helped me cross the finish line and kind of produce the book, if you will. And then we
Wow.
decided to go. We self-published. I really struggled with looking into an agent and looking into the formal way. And I talked to friends that are authors, and I finally made that decision. And I don't think
Mm.
it's an issue of right or wrong. I think it's just what's best for that given author. But I self-published. I'm really happy that I did.
Yeah.
I'm happy with the product. You know, when it came in the mail and I opened the package, I thought, there's no
Beautiful.
reason for me not to believe it's going to look good, but
Mm.
I wonder how it's going to feel in my hands and whatever. And my son and I, he happened to be with us over Christmas. He lives in LA, but he was with us. And I just pulled it out and I looked at it and he said, "Well, how about it?" And I handed it to him and he looked at it and went, "Wow, this looks good. It looks good. It feels good." So
That's amazing.
I say just finish it, Peter, and I'm sure you know, but there's times where you just go, I am so done. I can't finish this. I just
Mm.
can't finish it. And then you just stay with it. So something about
Yeah.
determination and
Mm.
help. That's my point of noting
Absolutely.
all those people is
Mm.
inviting people in, which was very difficult for me to do. I felt quite defensive around, hey, I like the way I said that.
Mm.
And you don't like the way I said that. And so there was some defensiveness that people had to say, hey, you're getting pretty defensive about this. You better grow some thick skin here
Yeah.
around this. And that was a real challenge for me. But I was
Mm.
able to get through that.
That's great to know. That's amazing, really. I love your take on this. Thank you so much for sharing. And now,
Thank you.
Doug, just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview and would
Yeah.
love to get a copy of your book, on what platform is it available on for purchase?
Well, they can sure go to Amazon and they can go to Barnes and Noble and those kind of online, or I don't think it's inside of a bookstore at this time. That's one of the things that we wanted to do. But you can also buy it. The publisher is BookBaby, and you can
Mm.
go to BookBaby because at times people have gone to Amazon. It's been out since the 15th of November. And I've had people reach out to me, Peter, and say, hey, it says that it's out of stock. That must be an indication that it's selling a lot. And I'm like, I don't really know why it's out of stock. I don't think it's selling that much. If you go to bookbaby.com, their online bookshop, it's never out of stock because
Okay.
if I understand the way it works, Amazon orders it from BookBaby. I did
Oh,
learn from an insider that they don't like to have a lot of books on the shelf, if you will, that aren't selling.
oh,
So they're still trying to feel out, I think, in the early days of a publication. Should we have a bunch of these, or are these just going to end up that we purchased them and we can't send them back? So Amazon is
oh,
and Amazon's a big player, right,
yeah,
in the literary world. So I get that. Um, so you can go to bookbaby.com. You can go to Amazon, and hopefully it's not out of stock, but you can get it one or two places there.
that's
It's twelve
great.
ninety nine, I think, for It's only in paperback. It's also in Kindle ebook.
Mm,
Um, and we just did this 2 weeks ago. We just did the audio book, which
amazing.
I was persuaded by my people to be the reader. So I went into the studio and read my own book. My friend
Mm,
asked me, "So what do you think about your book now?" And I said, "Well, I loved my book before, and now I'm in love with my book because I loved reading it. I
yeah,
really did. I really was jazzed to read it. It was really fun. It was very inspiring. So,
yeah. That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I left a link in the discussion part of this interview
thank you.
where
Thank you, Peter.
interested viewers can get a copy of Doug Wheeler book directly on Amazon and also on other platform. So thank you so much, Doug, for accepting the invitation to be
Oh, Peter.
featured on P English Literature. It's awesome having this conversation with you.
Mm. It's been a joy. You've been such a good interviewer. You're easy to be with.
Thank
So
you.
thank you, Peter. I'm honored. Thank you for pursuing me. It's an honor.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure as well. Thank you.
Pleasure.